In now. Hi everybody and welcome newcomers and Salonistas or regulars to the Compassion Salon. I'm Dr. Marty Balen, Marty, the founding director of the Salon, and it's so wonderful to see you all here. Please, as I said earlier, grab a drink, relax and enjoy the evening ahead. As I've said many times before, we started off in a small cozy pub, and I hope that somehow we can recreate that tonight with Theo and Catherine. So I'm just going to start with some practicalities and some salon info and news to start off with. Your microphones are muted, so we can concentrate and focus on Theo and Catherine's salon. Please, though, feel free to put your cameras on so we can see your faces, as I said, so we can see you smiling and waving, and that we know that you are there with us, because that's just wonderful in this sort of environment. Megan and Holly are new interns, and Jane are here to provide links that might be of interest and in the chat. And there will be an opportunity for chat and discussion and questions at the end, which will be chaired by the Reverend Dr. Harriet Harris, a keen supporter of the Salon, chaplain of Edinburgh University and one of the directors of the Global Compassion Initiative at Edinburgh University. Hi, Harriet. So the Salon, for those who are newcomers, is a compassionate initiative whose purpose is to provide a home and community around new and established authors and poets whose work relates to compassion and well-being. And it has become, over the last 2 years, maybe a year and a half, a place for people to connect, inspire and support each other using books and poems to think about various aspects of human existence and how that relates to well-being and compassion in an increasingly challenging global community. So you can find further details about the Compassion. Holly, Megan will put it in the chat at www.compassionsalon.co.uk. Please like us on social media if you're on social media channels, and please like our Eventbrite space. And also, we can't just send you stuff, so if you give us permission within Eventbrite and on our website, we can send you alerts to future events and things that are happening at the Salon. So all the books from our authors and hosts can be purchased from our bookshop on bookshop.org. Again, Holly and Megan will put that in the chat. And this bookshop.org supports local bookshops. In addition, we make lots of recommendations of recently published material, books, poetry related to compassion and well-being, which you will see there. And also what is marvellous is we get 10% of all books sold. So please keep us in mind when book shopping, as the Salon receives no revenue. So, and we want to keep being inclusive and keep all the tickets free. We're also supported by Lighthouse Books in Edinburgh. Lighthouse Books is a woman-led independent community bookshop that stock most of our Salon books and have in person a little wee Salon Compassion Corner, which I love, which is fabulous. And there's also some special signed ones, and all those links are provided on our websites and social media. Alongside the support of Lighthouse Books, I would also like to thank the Royal Society of Arts Scotland, with who we collaborate on 4 joint salons a year, and they provide us with this Zoom home, which is fantastic because we couldn't do it without them. And the University of Edinburgh Chaplaincy, in particular Harriet, for her continued sponsorship and support. Thank you. So for this particular salon, we are collaborating with the University of Edinburgh Global Compassion Initiative, the purpose of which is to catalyse, enable and embed the evidence and practice of compassion within the university and across relationships in the city and the world. And all the directors, I think, because I can't see them right now, are here. So hello to you all. And as I said earlier, we are also collaborating with the chaplaincy at the university, who provide pastoral and spiritual support for students and staff at the university of all faiths and none. And you can find further information in the chat as well. So there's lots of news. So the Salon also is coincidentally, with the launch of an Edinburgh University online self-directed course for individuals in compassion, which has been developed by an interdisciplinary group of educators at the university who are passionate about integrating compassion into the university curricula. Wonderful. The self-directed course offers participants the opportunity to explore compassion and empathy in work and life through theoretical understanding of compassion and reflective practice. And for staff and students at Edinburgh University that are here this evening, there is a link to the flyer about to fly into the chat for you there. So please get in touch with us if you're interested. I've just noticed actually, Holly, that there's quite a few people sat in the waiting room. If you could let them in, that would be brilliant. So this evening's salon is the first of 2 salons that is focusing on how we can integrate compassion into our work, cities and lives. This is, as many of us who are aware here this evening, there is a rapidly expanding evidence base for the use of compassion to transform society, including our educational environments and cities. So tonight we consider the Compassionate University, and in our next salon on the 14th of October, we consider the Compassionate City in collaboration with Leeds Festival of Kindness, Compassion and Wellbeing and Compassionate Edinburgh, where we will hear from Joshua Malkin, who's just come in from the waiting room. Hi, Joshua. And Marilyn Hamilton from Kinder Leeds and Integral City Meshworks. So there will shortly be a link to the festival, the Leeds Festival and Compassionate Edinburgh in the chat. So to tonight, I nearly said I'm going to say to infinity and beyond, as Buzz Lightyear says in Toy Story. Sorry, I don't know where that came from. But so tonight, Theo and Catherine will be considering how we foster a compassionate university through the scientific understanding and application of compassion. Dr. Catherine Waddington is a chartered psychologist, principal fellow of the Higher Education Academy, and reader in work and organisational psychology at the University of Westminster. She cares deeply about research and scholarship that brings academics and practitioners together and that makes a positive difference to people's lives. Her interests include organisational communication and knowledge and the development of compassionate, institutional cultures and practices, and has published widely in these areas. Catherine, wildly and widely. Catherine recently edited the book of this evening, to be discussed this evening, Towards the Compassionate University, From Golden Thread to Golden Impact, published by Routledge. The book draws upon a wide range of interdisciplinary, theoretical and professional perspectives, including social sciences, modern Darwinism, higher education policy and organisation studies, to address key challenges facing our 21st century university. Dr. Theo Gilbert. Theo is an associate professor in teaching and learning at the University of Hertfordshire. Theo wonderfully draws together current scholarship on the evolution of compassion, not as itself as an emotion, but as a psychobiological motivation to notice, not normalize distress or disadvantages of others, and do something wise to reduce or prevent that. From a background in anthropology, he translates this understanding from brain sciences into practical communication, compassionate communication strategies by staff and students in their task-focused teams and group work. Studies amongst students have shown enhanced inclusivity and critical insights across their teams. Theo has also created a compassion in education website that will go in the chat to discuss credit-bearing compassion in the university curriculum, and it provides the most wonderful resources, which I also use for compassionate curricular activity across the sector. And currently there are 70 higher education institutes in the UK and beyond part of this network, and we'll get that onto the chat for you. He also has lots of book chapters and YouTube videos if you want to go and hunt them out. So all our salons begin and end with a poem and some quotes as well. I know we're going to get from Theo. So this evening, Theo and Catherine will be providing and discussing theirs. Theo at the start, Catherine at the end. So without further ado, I pass you on to Catherine and Theo. Over to you.
Thank you, Marty. I understand, Catherine. It's my huge pleasure to start us off with.
Certainly is.
Thank you, Catherine. With a story that I've chosen. What I'd like to say to us, dear colleagues, thank you so much for coming together with us all like this. It's wonderful for these communities to meet. And what it means is that we are never alone. As Catherine and Marty point out, the move towards compassion is getting stronger and stronger and stronger, largely thanks to people like Catherine and others. But courage is going to be needed to push it forward, really, really push it forward. And courage is the natural ally of compassion. So could I please tell you a story, in not a poem, but a story. Imagine this: group psychotherapy. A group of phobics are sitting together in their group psychotherapy room. They've met many, many times before, and they're being developed in terms of their self-compassion, compassion for others, the science of compassion. There was a young man in the group who wears many, many layers of clothes, no matter what the weather, because he has a phobia of his perception of his own body odor. And he's been coming along for quite a while and has not been able to take off a single layer of clothes, no matter how hot, no matter how much he's perspiring and uncomfortable. These are life-changing phobias. And again, his colleagues in this compassion-focused therapy group are encouraging to remove this, to remove at least one layer, to comfort himself as a first act of self-compassion, but he won't. And one day, another lady tells him in the group, Ben, let's call him Ben, if you will take off one layer to cool yourself, as we would all love you to do that, I will write it down for you on that flipboard. He does it. He takes off a jumper and is clearly much relieved. It's a hot day. A lady gets up from the circle and she writes down, Ben has taken off a jumper to cool himself. That lady had not written. She had not picked up a pen to write for many, many years. That was her phobia. In other words, courage is the natural ally of compassion. That compassion generates enormous courage if not for ourselves, then for others. And in teamwork, in the university, we see this a lot. And we're moving in that case towards justice. As Rumi says, don't feel lonely. The entire universe is in you. You're not a drop in the ocean. You're an entire ocean in a drop. And as Cornel West, a wonderful philosopher from Harvard, says, never forget that justice is what love looks like to the public. Thank you so much, everybody. So we're generating courage and compassion today. Thank you.
Fantastic. And the way Theo and I know each other, we've met and had conversations like this before, and we haven't really rehearsed this, so we just want to have a spontaneous conversation. So if you then want to return with a question for me, Theo, feel free. But I'm interested, is there any personal reason why you chose that story? Why did you choose to give us that story?
One of the things that I worry about, Catherine, thank you for that interesting question, is that, yes, there are staff from 70 universities who have joined the compassion. They really want to do something, but sometimes we can feel lonely. We can feel we are just a drop in the ocean, just struggling along. One of the purposes of the Compassion in HE network is that now we're starting to have speed meets, sort of like speed dating online, where a couple of people will just meet each other for the first time for 6 to 8 minutes. And my goodness, this is where we're finding our allies, actually meeting our allies. Maybe we're all here to help ignite the web of angels. And I do feel as well, Catherine and colleagues, that there is an awakening of the collective conscious. Don't you feel it? We've seen this when rage could have been the key feature of the public response globally to the murder of George Floyd. We saw compassionate action, wise action to address disadvantaging and distress. Many of these protests were not violent, purposely not violent, no matter how angry people felt. So that compassion is not overwhelmed or derailed by emotions. It may generate emotions in its enactment, but emotions can derail what you want to do. So it's a question really of just trying to be as smart as we possibly can, strategic in the way the institution will listen to and understand, strategic, but to work together in solidarity. So wonderful. This is one of the reasons why it's such a joy to be here in the Salon. Catherine, what about you? Well, what has been your keystone for the work that you've undertaken these years?
Do you know, I was just going to ask you that, and that was literally because I was thinking when you asked me, so I know exactly what it is. I come originally from a background in nursing and healthcare, and I used to work in coronary care. So actually, I'm going to be really cheesy and really corny. I've got a little prop here, and you don't know if you can see it. It's a stethoscope. So yes, I did used to work in coronary care with it around my neck, and I've still got it. And somebody said to me ages ago, you're still listening to people's hearts, but from a different perspective. But that wasn't the kind of touchstone, but coming from a nursing background. And I found myself at the University of Westminster, where we've got a Centre for Resilience, and who put on regular panels for colleagues working in the NHS. And this was about 6 years ago. And I found myself at this panel discussion as a participant, and it was talking about closing the gap, the compassion gap in the NHS. This is the point of this story. This is how I became really interested in what I've called the compassion gap in UK universities, and I can put the link into the chat. And I found myself thinking, having worked in healthcare and in universities, is it any wonder that there's a compassion gap in the NHS, which is getting smaller, when sometimes the universities that educate, train, and teach people working in the NHS, the universities that we work in aren't always very compassionate. And I can remember when it came to the question and answer, I was the first one to put my hand up, and I said exactly that. Is it any wonder there's a compassion gap in the NHS when we have big compassion gaps in our neoliberal universities? And I got a round of applause and was asked to write a reflective piece, which has led to a whole range of things, not least of all towards the compassionate university. So here's a big plug. If your universities can buy this, all of the proceeds go to the charity Student Minds. So that was that, just kind of as a work and organizational psychologist, thinking about the very interpersonal elements of compassion, but the bigger picture where we have these compassion gaps that people fall through. So that's my little touchstone bit, thinking about the gaps. So for example, really, I had a conversation before I left my previous university with somebody who taught radiography students, people who do x-rays. And they said, you know what, we can't get money to give the students a tea party anymore when they graduate because there's just no money. Everything's all money driven. And yet these are people that are going out, and we'll be talking to people about, you know, you've got a shadow on your lung, and really difficult things. And if we can't give them a tea party before they go, because there's no money, and that still gives me goose pimples. But the tide is turning. I think the tide is definitely turning. Yeah.
It is. Thank you, Catherine. I'd like to go back, actually. You strike a deep chord with me when you talk about what it is that's going wrong in education. That means that our wonderful children, our graduates, are not fit to deal with the problems of the 21st century, let alone their own panic, bless their hearts, when they wake up in the morning in this culture that is infused with competitive individualism, which comes through education. The way we run education now, as Ken Robinson was talking about, so Ken Robinson, whose TED Talk has been listened to by more than any other TED Talk, please do look it up, that the education system is based on the Industrial Revolution, Everybody is batched, inspected, and pumped out the other end. And as Martin Luther King says, compassion without a moral compass is very, very dangerous. You're absolutely right, Kathryn. It was highly educated people privilegedly educated people who set up the slave trade. They knew exactly what they were doing. It was highly educated people who were on the boards of banks the Treasury found after 2008. There were almost no women. There were almost no ethnic minorities on those boards of banks. They were educated, intelligent people. They knew exactly what they were doing. So as Martin Luther King says, again, without a moral compass, education is very, very dangerous. So here I come into university, having come from FE, and I'm finding that we're an international university. And I love my university, the University of Hertfordshire. I love them for their courage in putting the rollout of compassion into the curricula, into their strategic plan, for which they're going to be checked on very regularly by the Office for Students. But I noticed that the Black students stay with the Black students, the Chinese with the Chinese, the British with the British white students with the British white students, and we're yet an international university. What is it in the competitive individualistic obsession that we have in politics, in media, in education, in business, that means that these young people do not feel safe to intermingle, to be diverse? So that is one of the key things I was wanting to look at. And it simply means that the threat system, reptilian brain, is the oldest part of the human brain. Our higher brain is the mammalian brain, touching, holding, caring, sharing. And then the neocortex on top, which allows us to imagine in resourceful ways how we can care for each other. When we came down from the trees and we had to search for food in the form of meat because there was no food there because of a climate change, we had to work in teams. Even the whites of our eyes still show that we can, not like a dog or a monkey or a horse, so that we could show. Kathryn's an expert on the Darwinian. I'm right behind you there. That Darwin wasn't saying the fittest means the most powerful, the one that the imperial empire can take up and use to punch every other nation in the face, but it means survival of the most cooperative, the most collaborative. And we've got to get back to the original trajectory of a species which just work in teams that cared for each other no matter what. This is so,
I'm just going to interrupt you because I just in regard to that, I'm so glad that you said that, Theo. And looking back, that bit about, Darwin never said evolution is about the survival of the fittest. It's about those that can cooperate, collaborate, and survival of the kindness. And I think it was somebody called Herbert Spence who put the first bit of Victorian misinformation out there. And look, without even social media, look how long that misinformation and disinformation, it was happening not even in social media now and in politics, it was happening in Darwin's days.
Yes, there was a political reason to misappropriate that, the imperialism and the violence that we then went ahead and did. That we're still paying for now. I mean, people are still paying for now. But one of the things I'm so encouraged by is that Penny Spickens, you may have come across her. Penny Spickens is a wonderful human anthropologist who, with many others all around the world, are finding that with the new medical technology that can scan human remains for far more detail and data than was ever possible before, we're finding things like a 1.6 million-year-old vertebra of a hominid that is deeply diseased with a very painful bone degenerative disease caused by vitaminosis, the overconsumption of vitamin A. Maybe that was because we were hunting and eating the liver quickly before we had to dash and run off in our teams. But this person had survived long time after they should have been expected to die. The evidence, therefore, is that this individual was being intensively nursed. That means turning, cleaning of feces, urine, must have been some sort of, lots of provision of food. I hope it wasn't liver, but intensive nursing. And then shoot forward only 36,000 years ago. Again, all over the world, the same evidence. A quadriplegic hasn't died. Intensive nursing by teams of people without resources to keep that person alive and cared for no matter what. And then with the advent of agriculture, dang, it's all gone. Now we can hold and withhold, the beginning of consumerism, we can hold and withhold. And this is why, and exactly how small things, Catherine, like the damage that Spencer did, can roll out and even change our epigenetics. So that the genes of Genghis Khan are now thought to be in the blood of 16 million men. We've got to get back to our original trajectory. We were honed for this for nearly millennia. We've only lost it in the last 15 years.
Can I ask you a question, Theo, to give us and our colleagues in the salon and participants just a bit of an example of what you're doing at Hertfordshire in relation to bringing compassion into the classroom and with students, so people have got some nice take-homes as to things that they can think about?
Well, thank you. I meant in the last 15,000 years. Well, I could tell you how it started. Let me just, and this may make sense. I was working in FE, and a young man, a young Pakistani lad, had set up his own business, very enterprising, incredibly hardworking, so took evening classes. I was commuting down from Hertfordshire because I just loved it very much. And there was real community there. In the ESOL class, English for speakers as a foreign language, there were Chinese, Italians, Venezuelans, Bangladeshis, Indians, Africans. My goodness me. This is what I so missed when I came to HE. One day he fell off the scaffolding, and nobody knew about this, but he appeared in the doorway of the classroom a little bit late. Everybody had taken their places and were chatting away, and we were starting the lesson, and he staggered through the door. He staggered to the doorway and hung onto the frame. He was so keen on doing well. He had a little girl of 3. He was just going to push himself to the limit. The whole class, my dear colleagues, the whole class, like swarm theory, got up as one, moved to the door as swiftly as they could, and literally gently carried him to his seat. And I knew immediately why he'd made every effort to get to his family, to get to his other family. When I went to HE and I found there was nothing like that going on, this was the competitive individualism, you know, where we teach students self-esteem, you're going to have self-esteem. What a nasty, horrible, toxic concept. It means that you are up against everybody else in the world on some aspect of your performance. And we find competitive individualism drives a kind of persecutory perfectionism that is implicit, I think, in this one student taking their life every 4 days in the HE sector. There's a big difference. So how could we start community? How could we grow community? I had an idea that maybe for the university we could do a speed meet table, like a speed dating. Everybody was invited. There were posters and leaflets. Very odd that students came who were doing, Pakistani students doing their PhDs in astrophysics, Chinese students from the business school, Japanese students in the School of Creative Arts, but no local white students. Local ethnic minority students, they came. Local Black students, they came. But the local white students seemed to be somehow afraid. So I realized there's a lot to be done, and it's got to be done in teamwork. I got into the classroom. I was allowed to sit in seminars all over the university, and I started to. My background is in anthropology. I got a tax rebate, and I took a master's in anthropology. And I thought, my goodness, I'm really when my son was 9 months old, and I was the key carer there. And I really got educated, and I started to notice things that sometimes people don't speak in a group because there's almost no chance for them to do so. One person, I'm a terrible example of this, and a tutor when I was a mature student said to me once, "Will you just shut up?" And I never spoke again. Yolande says the monopolizers, the people who take over, are often the most anxious. My goodness me, that was a blinding insight. It comes from the threat system. Got to have control of this. This is the fight and drive. And the other students who didn't get a chance to speak, after the first meeting, never are going to, the dynamics get set very, very quickly. And that also comes from the threat system, fight or freeze. stimulated, even in our children with Sats, Instagrams, who's got enough likes, why wasn't time for this overstimulation of the reptilian brain is driving these behaviors in which people cannot include each other. And I noticed, so my job was to notice what is setting up these behaviors? What's the trigger point for these behaviors? And how could students themselves dismantle them in ways that soothe people down enough for even selective mutism students, as at Exeter University, to start coming in and talking. How can, which has been very successful. Professor Edwards tells us there. She says it's been life-changing for her students, but they did it for themselves. We can't do it for them. There's only one of us in each group. They're doing a brilliant, brilliant job. So I won't go on about what students are taught to do, but you just give them the basics, and then their resourcefulness is wonderful. And the key thing is nobody is to blame for these behaviors. Yeah. That and Yolom, the wonderful Yolom, who says the monopolizer is often the most anxious person in the group. You start to notice then, is this why when somebody starts to monopolize in the classroom, in a group, they will look at one person only and lock eye contact with them. The effect is that the other students in the discussion group are thinking, why did I bother?
Yeah. One of the things that you said there at the beginning from your anthropology about noticing, that's given me a nice lead into something that we're doing at Westminster. We've just started doing it, which is a small project with, we've called it Developing Compassionate Practices in the classroom with students as co-researchers. And it's just a very small ethnographic study. And one of the things that we know about compassion is, in order to do something about people's suffering, people's distress, we need to notice it. And I think sometimes people just don't notice. So one of the things that we're going to be doing, I'm going to tell us slightly, I love metaphors. We're going to be working with students to hear some of their stories of compassion, their stories of self-compassion, their stories in the classroom. And I have a Finnish friend called Hannah. And when I've been with her and her family in her lovely summer cottage in the summer, and we'd go into the woods, and she'd say to me, well, we're going to pick mushrooms, but you need to know which ones not to pick. And so we looked in the book so that I knew what not to pick. So I knew I was learning how to notice. And I think that's really important, because for some people it just goes over their head. And if you don't notice, then you don't see and nobody else sees. And one of the big important messages for me in relation to compassion is actually calling out gaps in compassion, failures of compassion, people having the courage to speak up and being enabled to speak up. But if nobody listens, you'll speak into a brick wall. So we're thinking about, speaking up and having the courage to speak up about the positive compassion in the classroom and the positive stories and the gaps. And I will put the link in a bit later on in relation to my compassion gap paper. And then, if people listen, but higher up in the organisation, if there's no action, and compassion without action is nice words, kind words, but if nothing changes, so it's a big key message for me in relation today about compassion. It's enabling people to speak up about the gaps as well as the positive. This is really good. This is working. What a kind email you said. Wasn't it nice that, and we really appreciate that. Speak up, listen up, and that's often the kind of middle managers and heads of sections, departments and directors. And then you need a senior team to take action. Speak up, listen up, and take action. So that's one of my little messages to get back, get out of today. So speak up, sorry, it's not act up, that's the wrong thing. Speak up, listen up, and follow up. That's really important.
The problem, Catherine, when people speak up, they're thought to be acting up. What do you, I'd love to ask you, Catherine, and colleagues, what do you think about this in the case of bullying? Now, the Compassionate Mind Foundation which was started, my brother set that up. He's a professor of clinical psychology. And he noticed that CBT wasn't quite working, that when he was dealing with a lady who tried to commit suicide again, he tried to listen to, he asked her, he thought the CBT is not working. He was very upset. she came back and he said, Sally, let's call her Sally, what were you thinking about? And it was a very, very critical, nasty voice that came out with, she was saying, my husband is wonderful. I love him so much. My children, loving, an absolute blessing to us both. Everything that we would hope a successful participant in CBT would say. But out of her mouth came the most contemptuous, cruel, critical voice. We've seen it ourselves, haven't we, colleagues? When students have come in crying, I got a 73. Congratulations. No, I want to see you because I left a paragraph out. I'm so stupid I could kick myself. Leaving with tissues that I borrowed from my colleagues. We can't do anything to ease her mind. And we often find that people who are bullies have been traumatized in their own life. Trump was traumatized. His father would carry on in rages that never ended. His brother drank himself to death. Hitler was traumatized in the trenches, seeing all when he was 17 years old, and then told when he'd been blinded, oh, by the way, all your friends who died, all in vain because Germany's just surrendered. And at that time, he was thinking he would lose his sight forever. Attila the Hun had a brutal, vicious upbringing that was full of vengefulness. Why the Compassionate Mind Foundation? Why are we choosing these people as leaders? Because they will push forward and get things done. They will build that wall. They will persuade graduates, engineering graduates, to build those gas chambers that will kill millions. Oh, Martin Luther King will kill millions of them. What happens when we choose leaders in these big organizations, including HE, who will get things done and bully and bully and bully?
I'm going to go off a slight tangent there. But I'm just going, one of the things that we did in our book towards the Compassionate University, some of us in the book were part of an action learning set, and in a chapter that's about self-compassion, written by a colleague of mine called Jenny Nolan, one of the things that we did was share our own stories of self-compassion through our learning in an action learning group and what we were doing differently. So I'm just going to paraphrase this one. Obviously, action learning needs to be confidential. So we just called them. So this is a short story, true story, called Self-Compassion Turning Bullies into Sweethearts. I often bump into him as I'm walking through the corridors of the university. He's nothing good to say, nothing but criticism, whether I like it or not. Uninvited, he gives me his opinion. He says, you're an idiot, you're a failure, I can't believe you did that, you shouldn't even be here, you're an imposter. Perhaps, I wonder what HR would say, perhaps they'd put us in separate departments. But I know none of these measures would work, and here's the crucial bit. After all, the him I often bump into, the him that barges his way into my world so uninvitedly, is, after all, me. And HR departments are not yet ready to deal with staff turning up and declaring, I need some help with being bullied, and by the way, the bully is me. And I think that says a lot about how we develop the noticing and then attending to and taking action to develop skills of self-compassion. And this was a bit of a nightmare. So the kind of realization through action learning and a comment, yes, sometimes we do need to push ourselves that little bit to, a little bit just to get something done, get something finished. Yes. And so this was just a really kind of, aha turning point. So we need to think about, we also bully ourselves. And this is where, Kristen Neff's stuff around self-compassion is really important for students and also for staff that work in universities.
Absolutely, Catherine. I think one of the keys is how we get. I would suggest that the experience in the NHS and everywhere of bullies is of people we're actually meeting our traumatized selves. If that's not exactly so. And compassion is self-compassion. People are so resistant to it. Paul says, for example, he has men, particularly men, who are saying, "Oh, please, self-compassion, please." They see it as weak and wussy. But as he points out to them, and this is useful, think about this: noticing, not normalizing. Vigilance is noticing. Noticing, not normalizing. Danger or distress or disadvantaging to yourself or others through fire hazard, and then doing something wise. No point in throwing yourself into the water to save somebody from drowning, and you hit the water and you realize, oh, I've been overwhelmed with emotion. Oh, I can't swim, I forgot. And then doing something wise about it. So he will say to these men, would you tell a firefighter, charging in contextualization of compassion is right there. Notice the danger for yourself and others. Do something smart about it in relation to fire. And in the NHS, notice the danger or a disadvantaging or distress of your patients. Do something wise about it. No being overwhelmed with tears.
Marty's just given us the signal, the little heart in her thing. So I think you need to ask me why I've chosen the poem that I'm going to end our conversation with.
Oh, Catherine, yes, but no, this is going to be brilliant. What is the underlying reason for your choice of that?
Okay, and I think actually this spontaneous conversation has led to it. So this is from a book that's called The Poetry of Compassion, which is a collection by somebody called Professor Patrick Pietroni, who set up the Charles Darwin International Institute for the Study of Compassion. And just to give him a bit, if you don't plug things, nobody will do it. And he's got a really great series of in this series, Compassion and Science, Compassion and Education, Compassion and Economics, and it's all about the power of poetry. Patrick, and this is a poem that Patrick wrote. He is a Jungian analyst by background, and you don't need to know that much about psychology or psychotherapy, but essentially Jung said we all have a dark side. We all have a part of our personality that actually, you know, can bully ourselves. So it kind of links in with that part of ourselves that we may not like. And I'm not a therapist or an analyst, but a colleague of mine said, who was a therapist, said, well, just think about the people that you know that really irritate you, and then think, actually, there's a bit of you in there that actually, if they irritate you, and oh, for goodness sake, then reflect on that. So this is a poem that Patrick wrote, and it's based on our shadow selves, the bits of ourselves that might bully ourselves.
Yes.
Compassion and the other. It is in the safety of my own quiet corner that I can acknowledge my own shadow, filled as it is with all the blocks and hurdles that limit my capacity for compassion to the other, which again links with the bullying bit. My shadow is my own other. Know it, befriend it, and you will find it possible to approach all the others you will meet on your own journey with compassion. And if I get a chance, I'll put the text of this in the chat, because I do think that's so powerful, and it's got quite a fitting end to the conversation that we spontaneously arose at. So that's us, Marty, for now, and I'll put some things in the chat.
Thank you, Catherine and Theo. What can I say? I could sit here all night and listen to you. That was just absolutely wonderful. So many important messages, so much to take on board. We absolutely must continue this conversation. I know there are so many people here that want to talk to you, want to ask questions, and want to keep on this compassion tsunami that I keep calling it. So thank you. Thank you, thank you. I'm going to pass you on to Harriet now, and I encourage everybody please to write questions in the chat. Thanks, guys, and thank you, Harriet.
Thank you. Yeah, a really enjoyable, stimulating, inspiring conversation, and the personal stories. They're actually incredibly moving, as well as giving us a lot to learn from. So thank you very much for that. And I'm sure that people have a lot that they want to be asking. And while they gather their thoughts and pop questions in the chat, could I ask the two of you how you work with and have compassion for the fear within your own institutions about broaching this topic? And I wonder if I could ask you that with a bit of context from our institution in the background. So we've been having conversations towards a compassionate university for a number of years, and we found that there are fear at various levels. So at senior level, there's a fear that we might claim to be compassionate and then fail, you know, that it'll become a stick that hits us. So that's one kind of fear. And then at another level, there is a fear that people might be called out for having done something harmful, and that will be shameful, that it might get them into trouble. That also, I think sometimes what they miss, until we come in with some compassion training for particular teams, for example, what they don't get is that it starts with actually what's hard for you. What are you finding hard? Because what they think they might be getting, and I find the same with clinicians, is you're not being compassionate enough. They fear that's what they're going to get, rather than starting with, well, tell me why it's hard, you know, what is hard for you. And then from that basis, you know, they get it once they let you in the door. But there can be a real fear that people are going to be named and shamed as lacking in compassion. So I'd love to hear how you each handle that within your institutions and your insights.
Maybe if I can go first, because it's a really crucial question. But just to follow on from the poem, one of the things that I think is really important is we need to have a critical approach to compassion and understand that compassion isn't necessarily always good. And I think the point that you made, Harriet, is we can say that we're compassionate, but the reality, and this happens in all kinds of, you know, what universities and organizations say they do and how people experience what really happens. But to acknowledge that there's always another side to compassion. And so you can get like a lot of words that are used, they can become the buzzword. And then, for example, in politics, and I'm part of a group that's called Compassion in Politics. They've got amazing resources. You've only got to look, you can see somebody like, I'm not going to name any politicians, but their speech writer going, oh, well, we'll have a side order of compassion with that speech and that'll soften it a little bit. So I think you have to acknowledge that there are multi sides to compassion and it isn't always good. And you can also have what's called in organizations conspicuous compassion. Aren't we lovely? But sometimes I have a phrase that comes from a colleague of mine, somebody called Philippa Sully. Sometimes you have to be ruthless with compassion. So I suppose the simple answer is you can't have a one size fits all, but you do need to have to go back to what Theo said at the beginning, the courage to call it out and the courage to hear what's been going on. And again, the speak up, listen up and follow up. Because if people feel that they can't speak up in an organisation that says it's compassionate, well, in that case, that's nonsense. So calling out the anomalies.
I agree, Catherine. I would suggest that compassion is becoming a buzzword in politics, and that what these politicians and others are using is actually not compassion at all, but simply a lip service to it. And that only spreads misinformation about what compassion is. The empirical science of compassion through the Darwin Institute, through your work, Catherine, through neuroscientists, clinical psychologists, group psychotherapists, has been there for 20 years on the shelf. We have had every opportunity to reduce the distress of staff as well as students. We haven't done it. We haven't done it because we're stuck on the factory model. So what I discovered is that, in answer to Harriet's question, you have to speak the language of the institution. Do you remember Justin Haroon, when I came to Westminster, did a lovely talk on how the institution itself is locked, trapped in competitive individualism. There's a ranking table, there's a league table around every corner. So how are we going to talk about compassion in the ways that they will want to hear? And that, for me, I realized, and I don't know what you're going to think about this, guys, that to stick with this the science and say that any number of emotions can accompany compassion. Too much emotional involvement doesn't actually help you sometimes be compassionately effective. So, for example, you can be completely derailed. There are lots of examples of that. But one of the things that we know every university is interested in is student well-being, because they have to account for that in the NSS. They have to account for the BAME gap. They have to account for the queues and queues of students waiting for ages to get into their counselling services. They have to account for the fact that, well, they have to. How could we make compassion be the answer to their prayers in the league table? We would have to show students what it means to be compassionate in a particular context. Let's choose a context, online or offline, of teamwork. With widening participation, we've got to have teamworks and groups all over the place, otherwise staff can't cope. So what is going on there? If we go and look in there, we can see there is the root of the problem. And then, of course, you get people coming in to say, well, I won't go into that bit, but if we actually teach students how to deal with the two things that hundreds of students and staff have said are the worst things for teamwork, the over-talker, the controller, the self-nominated leader, through anxiety or whatever it is, that is the kiss of death. Other people don't get a chance to speak. And then the other students who don't speak and are considered freeloaders, all because it's got to, so we've got to get in there really, really quickly. And if we do that and show them the practical techniques for dealing with these quickly without silencing anybody, and effectively to keep opening the door, bringing that student that's so quiet out of the dark, cold water and onto the boat. We can't go on without you, you're too valuable. What do you think, in a gentle voice, as Sally, the lady who tried to kill herself again, was taught to be her most compassionate self, something she'd never imagined before. So we're saying to students, ask a student by name, Keisha, would you like to come in here? Keisha can say no. She may reach out and say to somebody else, one of the techniques, if she's scared, might reach out and say, Ahmed, could you help me out here? Choose another student in the group. What do we find now? Remember those phobics in that room? Students who are very, very shy will come forward and help that student because she said, Ahmed, please help me out. And they will smash it, because they've now forgotten that they're worried about, that it's been put out of their mind that they could make a fool of themselves. They could say something wrong. Their motivation has been changed. We can change it institutionally. You will be marked. This is what the compassion in HE is all about, the network, to mark, to assess the demonstrable strategies students use in their meetings to make sure everybody is heard and respected. So even as So then a student will come in, they're helping each other, and they get marks for that. Oh yes, they get marks for what they've brought to the table, they're reading to discuss the tutor's previous lecture or whatever it is they've been asked to do in this seminar. Each one brings their own. There's no point in giving them shared reading because they don't do it. But if they have to bring reading and feed others, this is an article by Catherine Waddington, 2017, on that previous lecture, and they just spend 5 minutes explaining what they found to the group, and then say, could you discuss this with me, please, to exercise their critical thinking. This is very helpful for authenticity. It's what employers keep asking for, not essays. We don't want people writing essays for the company every week. And plagiarism as well. We see that students can actually manage this very kind, if they're given the techniques, So a student coming in to help another keeps happening even with the shyest ones. And the students who are monopolizing a lot have said to us, this is where it takes courage and to be steady at the helm, to be ruthless. No. When they say, I'd like to talk in my seminars, I paid for this course. If these people don't want to talk, I've heard this so many times, that's their lookout. In actual fact, I've got to tell you, they drag the whole group down. But we have to stay steady at the helm. You will lose marks. If you continue with that, you will have to be far more concise and not monopolize. I've had students saying this is kumbaya rubbish, and then wanting to come back and say, I want you to interview me. And what we'll hear about this, we'll hear these monopolizers say things like, because vigilance is the first component of compassion. Notice. So here's a typical example. I'm not allowed to speak so much now, but my marks have gone up. Tutor says, yes, they're far more concise. I used to think if the monopolizers don't come, it's going to be like pushing a train up a hill. I've realized how the dynamics got set in the first seminar. But a student will say, I have to listen to other people now and be more concise and not speak so much. And what I've noticed is that I've got more to say. I let other people charge in and say what I could say, and I listen. And I start to notice things like a student comes in and says something, and I know that student's quite nervous and anxious, says something, and it's really good. But here's what I also notice. Somebody else responds to that student, and they make it absolutely clear whether they know they're doing this or not, but everybody else can see it. They haven't listened to a word that student said. They've been completely uninterested. She said, I wouldn't have noticed that before. And now here's me saying, please, tutors, forget you're not being asked to be woolly and emotional. Just let it happen. This is just the practical cognitive skills of compassion. And here we start to see the emotions building through the use of it. That student will say, I feel awful, she said. I feel awful. I would never notice that. I feel so bad for that student, and I then make sure that I respond to her, and she can tell that I listened to her, I heard her.
So Theo, we've got a queue of questions now, and I'm really wanting very much to bring people in. So first of all, I think Barbara was the first to have her hand raised, and some people are writing in the chat now, which is great because we can see the questions. I've written down the order in which I saw hands coming up. So Barbara, could I bring you in first? And just so you all know, these are the people I've got to ask questions. Barbara, Caroline, John Gillies, Chelin or Kellyn, not sure if I'm saying your name properly, and Leah. If there are others, do please raise your hands and we will get to you, okay? And we're finishing at 8:30. So Barbara, could you come in first? Would you like to unmute or? Great, and Leah's saying her cat. Thanks, Leah. Barbara, did you want to unmute and ask your question, or? Oh, I wonder if Barbara's. Oh, I think Holly or Megan need to unmute Barbara.
I can do that. I'm just sorry, I'm just looking to see if I can find Barbara. I wonder if Barbara.
She's unmuted now. I can see Barbara's unmuted.
Thank you.
There you go, Barbara.
Thank you.
Thanks. This is the first time at a Compassion Salon, and I have loved it. Thank you so much. So welcome. 2 questions. So do you know, first question, do you know, is the Open University part of the network? And the second question is, does this extend to postgraduate researchers, or is this an undergraduate university-wide thing? Thank you.
Thanks, Barbara.
Barbara, in the Compassion and HE network, yes, Kate Lister is a wonderful contact there with her colleagues, and she is also, and this network works very, very well. Some Compassion and HE network colleagues from Bath Spa University, 2 of them are disabled. They've won a welcome funding for their project to try to change the landscape through compassion and conflict resolution of disabled people. £1 million for that. I know Kate Lister is in there, connected them, and she's in there trying to help them. The network is coming together.
Thank you.
Great.
And there are many others too, I think. There are quite a few others, but she's a wonderful person to go to. Sorry, Barbara, I'm so sorry. I forgot your second question. I'm so sorry. Maybe so Catherine could answer that.
Yeah, is this also being rolled out, you know, for postgraduate researchers as well?
I'm looking after a couple of PhD students who are looking at online, compassion in teams online. One of them has found that screen gaze is far more steady over a number of groups, not just in the UK, but in Sri Lanka too, than when students are not given that 1.5 hours of compassion training. Just 1.5 hours of compassion training completely changes. She's using Python, Excel, and Jupyter.
Yeah, I'll contact Kate Lister. I'm going into 3rd year at the PhD, but I have found that the last 2 years, I mean, yeah, I think we've built our own sort of small postgraduate researcher communities of what I would call compassion, you know, and academic kindness. In fact, the other week we were having a conversation where we said it would be wonderful if you could judge university, you know, on the metrics of kindness and compassion rather than who has got the most publications.
Well, actually, may I say that we're rolling this out, and we've been using this for postgraduates and undergraduates. They all respond the same way, because compassion, as we know, is a universal. It's the way our brain was designed. The mammalian brain works with the neocortex. The caring brain works with the imaginative reasoning, smart brain. We've got compassion. So yes, at the university, this is beginning to be rolled out. It's intended to be rolled out through our wonderful LTIC, our Learning and Teaching Innovation Centre, to 24,000 students. And Derby used it as well. The reason why I talk about speaking to the institution is because they want to know, wow, what has this? They have to say this. What's the difference with the marks? What's the difference with student satisfaction? That's what we have to pin down. So 3 statisticians, Barbara, at professorial or readership level at Edinburgh University, the Royal Veterinary College, our own Professor Neil Spencer, Professor of Statistics in the Business School, have looked at our data. We compared to controls, they cannot see any evidence of a BAME gap in studies so far. And as Professor Philip Woods points out, he's a leader in democracy and distributed leadership, says the qualitative evidence from hundreds of students now is overwhelming that they feel connected. So it's literally for everybody, but to speak the language of the institution, you have to talk about evidence of bettered student well-being and belongingness, the breaking of the stranglehold of loneliness, and you have to talk about marks, grades, and BAME gaps. And I wasn't looking for a BAME gap, but when the data came up, it just kept hitting me that students, the rafts of students were being given, for example, well, in a particular model, for example, 30% for critical thinking. We're only interested in critical thinking. Critical thinking. What is the score for that? 30%, 30%. 2 business tutors, very experienced, who have marked everything together on a module we were working with. And then critical thinking in the professional discussion, and it's all filmed for external examiners to come back and say, yeah, keep this going. We're all right on that. We're all right on that support from external examiners, to be giving those students 70 overall, 70%. So we're going from 30% to over 70s by the same 2 tutors, double marking everything again, and skeptical ones as well. I applaud them for letting it happen. They said, you won't change anything. But we have. So that's the language you're thinking about, Barbara. It's for everybody. And deans are saying, and the National Crime Agency is saying, could you get down to Westminster? We've got the same problem with our committees. People who speak too much, people who don't speak. That's all from the threat system. It's our own fault. Sorry, Barbara.
So Theo, we need to move on now. So Caroline, you've got a question, and I've just noticed, Christine, I'm going to add you to the list, Christine. Thanks very much. So let's try and keep the responses short enough so that we can get through all the questions.
Yes, sorry.
So Caroline, yeah. Caroline will need unmuting. You there, Caroline? Okay, let's go on to John Gillies, who I can see is there. Hi, John. Hi, Mary. Nice to see you. Can we unmute John so that we can have John's question?
Hello, is that us?
Yeah, that's you. We can hear you.
It's actually Mary's question.
Oh, it's Mary's question. Great, Mary. You're called John on your screen.
Absolutely.
Mary, great. Thank you. Mary's the author of Well, which is a wonderful, wonderfully compassionate book. So, Mary, come and ask your question.
Oh, well, first, thank you, Catherine and Theo, for your wonderful commitment and enthusiasm and insights. Really appreciated. There's more of an offering that I'd like your feedback on, because the inner critic has come up as the inner bully, and as if there's something very negative about her. And certainly he or she uses a voice that we hope we'd never use on anybody else, and can be quite brutal. But we need, my experience is, and she's a her in my case, is she needs more compassion than anyone I'm listening to. And when through an interesting Tibetan method of almost having conversations with various parts of yourself, that you ask a series of questions and actually change seats. And I asked the inner critic, what do you want? And what she wanted was for me to do what she said, to keep us safe. Sorry, our daughter's trying to call now.
You're in a critic trying to get hold of you there, Mary.
Nice.
Boy, listen to me. Oh no, you're muted. Oh, what happened? Can we unmute Mary? She's still,
Yes.
there we go.
Yes.
Sorry, I'll try and speed up.
No, we didn't mean to unmute you.
What she said was, I want you to do what I say, but the next question is, what do you need?
Yes.
I need a rest. I'm exhausted. I've been trying to keep the pair of us right all your life. And all she is a demented nanny trying to keep somebody safe. And when you see her in that light, or him, as one patient said to me, she's only trying to keep me out of jail. Lovingly say, thank you for all your work, but you can retire now. You can go on a one-way trip to the Galapagos Islands and enjoy yourself endlessly. I'm grown up now and I can manage without. And when you speak again, I'll gently ask you to sit down and have a cup of tea because you're tired. And I found that...
Can I ask you a question, Mary?
Yes.
Have you ever, so you're talking about or somebody's inner critic.
Yeah.
Kirsten Neff often talks about, I wonder what it would happen if you wrote a letter, dear inner critic, and then responded back to yourself from, dear Mary. I wonder what those letters might look like.
Well, in a sense, that was the very conversation that there's this switching of seats, because you then actually sit in the inner critic's seat and answer from his or her point of view. And it's surprisingly fresh what comes up. Because it's only an aspect of ourselves, and not to be made an enemy of, but definitely one to be met and I think lovingly allowed to stand down.
Yes.
Yes.
I just would be interested in feedback, and I agree with the letter is the same thing.
And because sometimes when you think about when we take the time to do the old-fashioned thing of getting some nice paper and a nice pen and with a nice table or what have you, a nice cup of tea, and taking the time to think about what you're writing, or maybe some of the emotions as well as the things that you might say. And you can also do that just to your physical body, dear body, I think I've been neglecting you, I'm not getting enough sleep, and then your body writes back and says, well, actually you're being a bit too harsh on yourself, but go to bed early on Saturday night or whatever. It can be quite illuminating.
Very
I love the body saying, you're being a bit harsh, but you could go to bed. That's great. Thank you. That's lovely. And thank you for that share as well, Mary. So Chillin, can we hear from you now? And Marika, just to let you know, I've added you to the list of questions. Thanks very much. So we want to unmute Chellin or Selin, Kellyn, I'm not sure. Cellyn, if they're there. And perhaps while we're looking for that person, can we bring in Leah Viner, who has actually put the question into the chat, and it's a great question about the relationship between individual and it's one thing to teach students to be more compassionate to their peers, but I'm struck by Kathryn's example of the students who couldn't have their graduation tea party. What policies are part of the Compassion in the HE programme that will change how university approaches its students, particularly vulnerable ones? So, and Leah's involved in a programme that looks course by course, that is trying to roll out an initiative to enhance student wellbeing course by course. So
I can give a direct answer to this, because this was from another university, and I had this very similar conversation with a colleague at our university who said, yes, I know, funding and what have you, but I do it, and I do it, and she pays from her, I think either from one of her own budgets or one of her kind of personal research reserve, and so it's something. And we know it's the little things that make a huge difference, and the little things that may not cost very much. But it's just particularly when you get to the in-professional courses and people that are going to be out and working with vulnerable people, patients, clients, or even just people in the general public. We need a much more compassionate society. And it is the little things that make a huge difference. So sometimes they don't necessarily have to be financial. It can just be a kind word, and a smile like you're doing, Harriet. Just something, so it doesn't have to be financial, because it's the things that people remember. And like Maya Angelou says, it's the way that people are towards you. You're not necessarily remember what they said, but you remember how they made you feel.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. If I could just add to that, and my suggestion is, if we get real now, especially with the pandemic, if we get real, the institution isn't going to do it. But we can. We can get into that room and give the students the educations that they're now telling us. Why weren't we taught this in school? The Compassionate Mind Foundation is moving into schools now. By the time they get to us, they're in a terrible state. Their threat systems are so raw. They're so worried about being alone and failing. Higher self-esteem students, for example, have a much higher chance of dropping out, Emma Kingston found, because they rely on self-esteem. The institution is not going to be able to do anything, guys, but we can. We can do that. We can teach students how to be, and I suspect they might even have said, okay, let's organize it for each other and invite the tutor. Compassion is resilience. I think the power is in our hands if we're strategic about this and say, look, it's going to give you higher marks. It's going to give students are going to feel better. They'll be able to reach out to people at 2:30 in the morning on WhatsApp if you show them how to look after each other. We know that because they've done it and they've written about it. I don't think the institution is going to be able to do it until they see more and more evidence of what's in it for them. I'm on the board of governors at my university, and I can see they haven't any choice. So the vice chancellor is told, look, when he meets all his staff, and they can all come on. About 200 emails on a Sunday morning when I simply asked students if they had any real worries, please contact me. How am I going to cope with 200? And all he can say is, thank you so much. That's it. But we have the power. We've got the power in our own curricula design.
And also,
thank you.
Students have power, and one of the things that we need to do is, rather than seeing them as consumers who are buying their degrees, our job is to help them use their power wisely, and doing it together, which is why, going back to the project that we're doing, which is about working with students as co-creators and co-researchers and finding out what it looks for them. But there's also an element of actually owning our vulnerabilities. As we're about to start this project, I'm thinking, will it be all right? And how do we support students, and what other institutional resources will we have to enable students to have the courage? Because I have to be prepared with a student as you might think you're compassionate, Catherine, but do you know what you said to me? Because sometimes we all need a bit of home truths, we all need a bit of feedback. And so how do we help students talk to us in that way and hear things that we might not want to hear? I've got one funny little, well, it's not a funny little story, but I can remember I use metaphors a lot, and saying to a group of students at another university as a classroom example, if this university was something else, what would it be? It would be a mobile phone. Why would it be a mobile phone? Because there are some areas where there's just no reception whatsoever. It's just completely dead. There's no signal. Oh, so what kind of a phone would it be? Is it a state-of-the-art phone? No. They said no. It's just a bog standard pay as you go. You pay with your emotions. That told us an awful lot more about the student experience than an NSS or a module evaluation. So I think we need to be creative about how we get feedback from students and how they're experiencing our universities, rather than metrics or numbers, because my own view is metrics and numbers have caused the mess we're in at the moment. So I love that.
Yeah,
as I'm getting older and thinking about retiring, I do have the courage to say, stop now, that's not good enough, and if you don't like it. So something I'm writing about at the moment is resilience through resistance, and just kind of weathering the storm, and then creating ripples of compassion. So Theo talked about a tsunami, creating ripples of compassion that actually begin to overwhelm the neoliberal damage that's been done over the last 30 years. So I'm actually I'm not an anti-vaxxer, but I think metrics, yes, we need measurement and whatever, but they are part of the problem, not part of the solution.
Not necessarily. Well, in terms of group, you're absolutely right. Catherine, I can't disagree with that. That's irrefutable. So again, we've got to be really strategic at showing that these metrics could be they could be useful in the language and the needs of the institution, but they must be on students' terms. So for example, a 1.5-hour session with 228 students all crammed into a room together, and then they're given a reflection. There are several ways you can assess their compassion along with what else are others, and it's individually assessed. So for example, 2 questions, and these students wrote just a page each in answer to each question. It was 4 paragraphs. Number 1, what is it I do in this group work to enhance my fellow students' social belonging, social and learning experience that they most value in me? Second question, what have I done to enhance my fellow students' social and learn? What have I done? Be vigilant, be vigilant. What have I done to enhance my fellow students? What have my fellow students done to enhance my social learning experience that I most value in them? So this is going out now to modules, but they've got to have that. They've got to have that first session on what to do when these common dynamics, these functional dynamics turn up. What to do that is effective and compassionate, kind, gentle, not silencing anyone.
And Leah has really helpfully put in the chat a link to what they're doing at her university, Simon Fraser University. So do have a look at that link and see how they're doing the rollout. So we've got questions from Susie Hills and then Marika. So let's go to Susie first, if we can. Susie, is somebody able to unmute Susie, who's also been quite active in the chat?
Hello.
Hi, Susie. Hi. Come and ask your question. Thank you for being so engaged with the conversation.
I'm really interested in universities putting kindness or compassion in their values statements. I think there's only about 6. I tried to do a count. It's probably more than that, so some of you know. And then, you know, we all know that value statements can be written by a small group of people in isolation and not used, or they could be created in a collaborative way and really owned by an institution. And that could guide behaviour. So I'm interested in the views of our speakers on, does it matter if kindness and compassion is in your value statements, and should you push for it to be up there, and could that help the institution to change?
I would say quickly thank you. Yes, I agree. The difficulty is that people don't understand what compassion is. They think it's woolly, touchy-feely. And we've got some brilliant values at the University of Hertfordshire. Whether they are enacted right the way through the system is a different thing. Catherine, over to you.
And I think I had a conversation with this, and I know that he's in the chat somewhere. I don't expect him to come up, but Yusuf Kaplan, who's our interfaith advisor, and a colleague from his team, David Morris, about that today. And I think it's about looking at how values are enacted in a huge range of ways. And again, it's the small things. So we're having a conversation about what about people who are serving lines of students in teaching week 1 with a smile on their face, probably being paid about the minimum wage by Costa Coffee or whatever. And the people who've kept our universities clean and through the pandemic, and how we have, what does a compassionate university that values compassion look like and feel like when you walk through the door? What impression do you get? I think that's really important, as well as all the other maybe measurable things. And also people looking happy. It's a happy place to work, and people look out for each other. And I think one of the things that's really important, some universities are beginning to, with things like their promotion criteria, rather than saying how much grant application money have you brought in and how many 3- and 4-star ref papers have you had, can you give an example and some evidence of when you have been kind and collaborative to a colleague and got some feedback from them? So I think we need to start bringing, compassionate credentials and criteria into things like, promotion and progression, as well as all the other things that are much more easily measured. It's the things that you can't easily measure that are often the most important.
One of the big challenges, I think, as well, is it's not just when you walk through the door, is it? But it's when you get the emails. or when you look at the website, and if the emails are constantly officious, you can feel the institution doesn't care, and that's a really tough one. Yeah, Marika, Susie, thanks so much for that question.
It's a brilliant question.
It's actually at the heart, isn't it, of if we're talking about compassionate universities, do we want to put the label compassionate onto a university? And it's a really crucial question. Marika, please come and ask your question, because somebody unmute, and I don't know if I'm saying your name right, so please correct me when you get your voice. There we go.
Yes, yeah, you pronounced my name correctly. Thank you.
Oh, good. Thanks, Marika.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for the lovely talk. And I have to say, so I haven't read Kathryn's book yet, so my question might be a bit off, but it's now on my Google Play folder to read it soon. So in any case, I have two questions actually, because I was surprised how you so Theo, how you emphasize the strategic aspect of being compassionate. I was surprised because in a way, I mean, we saw the same with the mindfulness movement, and they were very successful in being very strategic in terms of bringing mindfulness into institutions, but now they got all this critical backlash in terms of mindfulness actually not being powerful if we say you are mindful in order to get better grades. And I would also say compassion is very, very powerful, but is it still compassion if we tell people do compassion training because that makes you a more successful student, or, you know, so I wonder to what extent this goes together, basically trying to fit something so very radical as compassion into the institutions we have. And I know it's a very difficult question because we can't just change institutions radically speaking, but I was just wondering how you would address that question and how that goes together. And another question I have is that many people would also argue that, I mean, there's something generative about suffering, and there's something generative about harshness as well in academic debates, for instance. And I wonder if we might also, if we might lose something if it's getting too soft. I might miss the point here, but I'm coming from sociology, and for us it's all about staying with difficult emotions, being with the trouble, and seeing the generativeness also of suffering. So I wonder how, let's say, this compassion group deals with it. I'm sorry, I'm very much an outsider perspective bringing that in, and just very curious. Yeah.
Those are very interesting questions, Rika. Thank you.
Maybe I'm going to ask you, Theo, if you could answer, and then I've just got a very tiny little bit from the book that I can maybe.
Thank you, Catherine. Marika, yes, this question comes up a lot. Aha, so we're actually encouraging students to be mechanistic and strategic, I quote, by being compassionate. It doesn't quite work like that. We have students who are very resistant to this. We have to stay strong, courageous, steady at the helm. You will not cut people off. That's where you're going to lose marks. How can I do? If you cut somebody off, you will lose marks, unless somebody can save you. Somebody can go in and bring that person in. You'll rely on somebody else to save you those marks. These are very simple rules. They sound complicated. They're incredibly simple and easy, and they're cost-free to teach. So then students will come back and say, I get it now. A student who said afterwards who'd been very resistant, now I realize, this is very interesting, we're not only responsible for, we're responsible for people having something to say and being able to say it. Now, isn't that interesting? Not just being able to say it. So what we're finding is that if we don't suggest to people that this is all an emotional thing, because they won't touch it, they can't touch it. They certainly can't put it into their strategic plan. Susie, that's where they're accountable, the strategic plan. Mission statements, I'm sorry, to a penny. We've done research on that as well at the UH. So if we find students who are resistant to it, who are changing their minds, are starting to seek out people in their teams that they wouldn't have been ever inclined to work with before. I wouldn't have worked with somebody. A Muslim, a student who said, to be honest, very honest, and she was very honest, to be honest, if they're not Muslim people, I'm not going to work with them.
Okay.
And then coming in late and working with everybody because they knew how to make her feel safe. Complete mind change. And to say that students are not innately compassionate is itself a very harsh, destructive, toxic thing to be imagining. We find that students are hugely compassionate and resourceful about how they can make this. Once they're legitimized, once they're given the license and said, you'll be rewarded for this, it's not assessment, it's reward. Do your best. And they're brilliant with each other. Sorry.
And Harriet, maybe if I can just do, let Bob Dylan conclude this. This is in the answer to, is it Marika? In the book, Towards Compassionate University, in chapter 1, which I wrote, which is called Why Compassion, Why Now? On page 11, there's a section called Cultivating Critical Compassion, and that's really important. So there's and we need to have an interdisciplinary perspective. So psychology's got something to say, neuroscience got something to say, world religions have, sociology have. So this is a sociological critique, which argues the major limitations in this field of scholarship are a focus on compassion as a psychological state rather than a social relational construct, a tendency to ignore the power dynamics inherent in these social relationships, and that is so important, and also a prevailing view that compassion is virtuous, neglecting the negative outcomes that may arise alongside positive. So here comes a bit from Bob Dylan, and it's quoted in a paper by some sociologists. In these times of compassion, when conformity is in fashion, Bob Dylan, 1991, a little deviance from conforming with the organisational compassion trend may be in order. Organisational compassion is not invariably positive, nor is it the universal good it's often presumed to be. We must always ask who benefits from what knowledge and what are its power effects and what type of subjects it constitutes. So we need to cultivate a critical approach and have many voices that are heard and disagree and then come out with something better.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's wonderful. And what a great way to wrap up. I want to say thank you to everyone who's asked questions. I want to say sorry if I've missed anyone. I really hope I haven't. And if I have, really so sorry. And thank you so much to Kathryn and Theo for being so responsive and so rich in all of your contributions. I hand back to Marty.
Thank you so much, Harriet, and thank you so much, Kathryn and Theo. I just want to say, from a personal perspective, for someone trying to integrate compassion into curriculum and teaching compassion, sometimes by stealth, thank you. It's so wonderful to talk about this. It's so amazing to continue this journey together. I just want to say that Claire Lothman has just written in the chat, and she has said what I think a lot of us are thinking is, thank you so much for thought-provoking and uplifting discussion. It is inspirational for the work as we start writing our learning and teaching strategy. So that's from Canterbury Christchurch. So what can I say? I mean, this is the difference that we're actually trying to make. So thank you so much. I'd also like to say thank you to Megan, Holly and Jane, who are working away busily in the background. Thank you to Harriet, and thank you everyone that's here. And just to say, our next salon, which is towards a compassionate city, with Josh, who I can see, who will smile, and Marilyn Hamilton, is happening on the 14th of October. So that will be linked into the chat. So we'll see, hopefully you there. Thank you. Namaste. We will see you all soon. Thank you.